Thanks, Liz. I appreciate it. Thank you, everybody, for coming. A couple quick notes. I appreciate this opportunity to speak. Public speaking is one of my worst fears, and I hate it. I tend to ramble, so if this goes longer than the 90 minutes allotted, please forgive me. Thank God this isn't streaming live, because then I'd really, really be nervous. As I do with most opportunities when I'm asked to speak, I say, Frank, you're going to help. So part of this presentation is Frank Wong, AVP for Planning and Development. So in a few minutes, I'm going to tap Frank on the shoulder. So this is from PRF to renovation to board approval, what happens in between. So the board approval and PRF process here is a little bit like buying a United ticket, right? You log on to United, you check the next day, you check a week later. There's been a lot of changes, sometimes wild changes, and you're not really sure that anybody knows why the changes happened. So that's what it might seem like, but I'm here to tell you that this is kind of a carefully choreographed ballet that is a nimble approach to projects at an institution as large as we are. So if I told you that we had 800 million in projects underway right now, with hundreds and hundreds of individual projects, you might be surprised, right? So a project for Frank might be different from a project for somebody in John Shulak's group, which might be different from a project in Henry's group, which might be different from a project for IT. When I talk about projects and project request forms, we're no longer talking about the traditional renovation or new construction, right? And we're going to talk about that in a little bit as well. Before I start talking about PRFs and the process, I want to make sure that we're all on the same page in terms of jargon, right? We use these abbreviations around here. I'm not sure that everybody knows what PRF really means, what F&F really means. So PRF, project request form, right? So it's a critical first step. This project request form is available on the website at pdd.rutgers.edu. And it really is the first thing needed to start a project and start a project well. So it takes about a minute and 30 seconds to fill out. So we want our end users to begin with that, right? If a project is so important to our client or end user, if it's that important, they'll go to the form timely and fill it out, right? So it's not tied to AIM or any specific brand of capital project software, right? Today, the PRF is submitted and it gets tied to AIM, but it's not an AIM product. I need your help, we need your help to make it work well, right? So years ago when I first came here, projects sometimes got initiated by somebody knocking on a door, running into somebody on the street. We'd find out that some projects were underway and were never in the system. We really looked and worked hard to rein that in, and today I think the system works pretty well. So my compliments to everybody who's helped that mission over the past couple of years. For the most part, this system works well. It's not perfect, but boy, I got to tell you, the improvements that we've seen over the course of the past few years are fantastic. Board, right? It says board approval. Rutgers is unique in that it has two boards, Board of Governors and Board of Trustees. And if anybody ever runs into Rob Rosen, you can have a 3-hour-long discussion on the importance of that. When we talk about board today, it's the Board of Governors, right? The Board of Trustees does not approve capital projects, although there's an asterisk on this, and we'll talk about it when we get to land use. So board, when I talk about the board, is the Board of Governors most times. F&F, you've probably heard the abbreviation F&F, F&F. I've heard that it's facilities and finance. I've heard that it's finance and facilities. It is the Committee on Finance and Facilities. It's the committee of the Board of Governors that really reviews in detail what we submit to them and makes a recommendation to the board for their action. And I got to tell you, Frank, you've been here a lot longer than I have. Have we ever seen an instance where the board has rejected a recommendation of the F&F?
I can't say that I've seen that.
Okay, so I am not calling it a rubber stamp. What I am saying is that there's really good information done at the committee level, and the committee makes that recommendation to the board, and typically the board accepts the recommendation of the Committee on Facilities and Finance. CPAC, you may have heard of CPAC. That's the Capital Planning Advisory Council, and Frank's going to talk about that in a few minutes. And CPAC's one of the more challenging things we're going to talk about today. And then there's project, right? So everybody here, I am sure, has a different definition of project in their head, right? Sometimes it's the conventional renovation or new construction. Utility work is a type of project. Master planning. An aggregate of related projects is a project. Building and building systems assessments, feasibility studies and vision documents, grant applications, land transactions, right? There's something you might not think of. Monuments and major markers. One of the most fun projects that Andrew and I are working on right now with Joe Paternoster is a horse statue. So it is a project. It takes resources, that's for sure. Or roll out of a new platform. So this year, institutional planning operations had two significant projects, campus maps and, mine's in my pocket, campus university IDs, right? So if you're working in Georgia's area, your definition of project might be something that is tangible and occupiable at the end, but we have these things like campus maps, which now are a project and product of institutional planning operations. There's a PRF that initiated that. So it is a project, got a defined time period, specific scope, and requires resources. Everything that I just mentioned is a project. So the one exception that I talked about with boards was land transactions, right? So Seth and Marie, I see you in here, right? Some land transactions have to go to both boards, right? Trustees and governors. It's kind of a straightforward answer, kind of not. So I'm not going to get into that here. But for capital projects, when I talk about the board approval, it's Board of Governors, right? So that Board of Trustees approval is something very unique and specific to land use, and most people in the room need not worry about that. Threshold, board threshold, right? You might have heard this term, board threshold. Today, it's $5 million. If a capital project is going to cost $5 million or more, it must go to the Board of Governors. Years ago, it was $2 million. So that's a significant increase from $2 million to $5 million. Where that increase came about, I think, is a high level of confidence in Tony and institutional planning and operations. The committee and the board members, as well as senior administration of the university, realized how much stuff was going on here, how busy we are, the magnitude of what we're working on, and to hold all projects between $2 and $5 million up until one of 4 or 5 annual board meetings is tough, right? Tough to make progress. So the policy was changed, it was updated, and there's a $5 million board threshold, and by policy, the executive vice president and COO has spending authority of up to $5 million without board approval. So that's the last term I want to cover is threshold. The old days it was $2 million, today it's $5 million. So a little bit of pertinent history, and history can really, really be boring, so I'm going to try to keep this focused. In order to understand where we are and where we're headed, I do want to talk a little bit about pertinent history, kind of 2012-ish, when we had a new president, a university that was soon to be significantly changed, and a very process-driven president. So I wasn't here when the CPAC process came in, so it's very hard for me to speak to. So Frank, I'm going to ask you to kind of come up. They didn't give you one of these neat tie clips, so kind of, yell loud if you could, please.
Organization, for a long time, capital projects were sent to the Board of Governors for approval through the creation of something called a concept document, which is something that my office wrote. And it contained a background and justification for the project and a schedule and a budget. And because the university was a much simpler organization back in the time, with one senior administrative vice president, so there was one person who kind of took this to the board. This concept document was provided to, back in the day, it was Joe Whiteside, and Joe Whiteside would take it to the board. The university has changed significantly. We have a president who is very hands-on in terms of capital projects. We have now appointed chancellors for all of the different campuses. We have 4 chancellors, so we've kind of elevated some of these academic officers. And so the old model using a concept document sent to the senior administrator evolved into something that was called CPAC, so that's the Capital Planning Advisory Committee, and the president, Bob Barchi, was the chair of CPAC. And basically, any chancellor who had a project that he or she wanted to take up to the board would submit a proposal to CPAC, which is this committee composed of the senior administrators and the president and all of the chancellors. I was staff to the committee, and we would review this proposal. It was also required for the applicant to submit a business plan. And the business plan was something new, but it really reflected sort of the financial reality of the institution. Basically, since Rutgers does not have deep pockets, doesn't have a bank of resources to constantly fund all of these projects, they were basically turning it back to the applicant and saying, how are you going to fund your project? So they had to submit a business plan, which probably involved how they would either generate money for the project through some additional classes that they would run, or maybe they were going to pull in a big donor to help fund it. But the CPAC required projects to basically self-sufficient and have a plan to kind of support it before it could go to the board. It's evolved even more. So CPAC was in place for a little bit of time, and it's about to evolve again, and I suspect Dave will talk about what it's going to become. But part of what has also happened is that the administration has become more complex. There's a CFO, a chief financial officer, and in addition to a chief operating officer. So we have more administrators in the mix that are part of this conversation. I was sort of the gatekeeper of CPAC, and I expect that I'll be involved in some way going forward in the future in bringing forward projects to senior administration for approval. So that's kind of a quick history.
University facilities and capital planning, right? And back to the PRFs, right? Once a month, at most, once a month, we would get together in a conference room and review the dozen, maybe 18 PRFs that came in during the course of the previous 30 to 60 days. We'd go through, say, all right, what kind of project is this? Is it a legit project? It's going to get assigned somewhere. Where does it go? And once a month was okay. Between 2013 and now, we've seen an incredible change in us and in the university, right? So overnight, the university grew by absorbing most of another university. Relatively quickly, institutional planning and operations was created, right? Pulling in public safety, which, by the way, does projects that get tracked through the PRF system. We became more complex. Right? There's 4 chancellors. We became busier, right, in terms of capital projects. At the same time, the tolerance for moderately paced projects has gone down, right? Everybody in this room has seen this, right? Who's had time to take a breather and say, I can't wait for the next project to come in, right? It doesn't happen. So we adapted. Right, so we adapted the PRF process, we adapted the CPAC process, we adapted the board approval process. So I'm now going to get into the process part, and for anybody looking for a black and white answer, this is not a good use of the next 2 hours of your time, right, because it doesn't exist. I do want you to drop questions in along the way, right? This is not a straightforward, easily described process. I think it's an effective process at the end of the day when you consider how big, how busy, and how varied we are. But I encourage you to ask questions along the way. So there's this PRF. I'm going to go back to process now, right? You log on the web, you fill out the PRF, maybe 8, 10, 12 lines, and hit enter. Then what happens? I think there's probably 3 people at the university who really understand what then happens. I'm going to kind of expand that 100-fold here. So that email comes to a number of people, Ghislaine, Madeline, Loretta, and me. And I look at the PRF, right? So the PRF, there's an example here, right? It comes out to 2 pages if you look at it on the screen, got lots of good information. 9 times out of 10, there's enough information to make a judgment on what's next, right? So that 1 time out of 10, there's just not quite enough information to figure out what to do with this. So it gets tabled for a short term. And then I'll ask somebody, hey, do me a favor, here's this PRF that was submitted. I don't quite know what to do with it. Go talk to the person, go talk to the submitter. What do they really want? What do they really need? What are their expectations, right? So, within a week usually, the person comes back, we have the information we need, and the PRF moves from tabled to assigned. Okay, with that information, we now know what to do with it. It's going to go to Tom Boland in Newark. It's going to go to Janice Davey, who will then assign somebody else. It's going to go to Nick Fabroni, might go to Pat Harity if it's a grounds thing. So that's the very few come in like that. Most of them come in with good number of information, a good amount of information. Some come in with such good information that they get spiked, right? They come in so clear on what they want that we look at it and say, you know what, this isn't a project, this is a work order. So if I get a PRF, a project request form that says, fix my bulb, change my bulb, the toilet is running, right, that never gets converted to a project. It gets spiked, the requester is notified that this is a work order and instructions are provided on how to get that work order in or who to see. So this is where my compliments to Ghislaine and team, because nobody in this room, but for 2 or 3 people, see how many are spiked, right? So that tells me the system works. People are going to the website, they're putting in information, and we are getting them the right information quickly when it's not a project. So it works well. Then there's the assigned, right? So PRF comes in, and there's a number of roads that we're going to go down where it gets assigned. So let's say that it's a funded project and it does not rise to the level of needing board approval. So somebody says, I have money, I want to renovate these 3 rooms, I want to make it into a conference room, a cubicle area, and an office. It gets assigned, right? So it's going to go to Janice Davey, or it's going to go to Tom Boland if it's up in Newark, and from there, it just gets done by the project management staff. And I actually have nothing to describe because that's not my domain, right? It just kind of gets done, right? Those are the simplest projects. You're asking for the right thing, you have money, okay, we'll do it, right? So that's easy. That's the easiest out of everything I'm going to talk about today. Then there's the non-funded project not requiring board approval. We have this project. I don't have the money yet, but the money's going to come. Then I got to talk to people, right? So most times we will help whoever the requester is, right? So most times they put in a request, say, look, I want to do this project. I don't know if it's $100,000 or $1 million. Help me figure it out. And that project will be assigned, but we won't go out and hire, right? So there'll be some there'll be some consultation from our resources that says, look, this project could be anywhere from $500,000 to $1 million. And people might say, all right, we can do that, in which case the person who it was assigned to will continue, or they might say, oh, I don't have $1 million. All right, either let's not waste our time and let's not turn this into a project you don't have money for, or what can you afford, what do you want to get done? And then that can get done. Non-funded project needing board approval. So that's a maybe we do, right? So there's, again, no black and white here. So let me give you a good example of a non-funded project that requires board approval. Frank and team have been working for years on sale of valuable land in Adelphia, right? So we have this turf farm down there. The county needs to acquire the land to do a major road renovation. And the road renovation's worth it, right? So you have this, significant 4-lane county road, significant 4-lane county road, and you have this little winding 2-lane road that wanders through our sod farm, and there's bad crashes and people die, right? Not funny, right? For real, right? So the county wants to straighten that out, make it safe, and it takes years of engineering effort, negotiations, real estate effort with appraisers before we can hammer this out, right? So that is a critical project. It is critical that we were involved from the get-go, from early on. We have to hire consultants. We have to bring in experts, but there's no money yet, right? Because it's land disposition, it's going to go to the board. So we will, in coordination with Henry Velez, the CFO, we will front the money and collect when the proceeds come in, right? So that's an example of non-funded, but it's important for the university. My message on that is John, Henry, and I will figure out the funding part, okay? So when this gets assigned to any of you through the PRF system, it shouldn't matter to you that the money's coming later. That's a really important part of today's discussion, right? So Henry and John and Tony and I choreographed the ballet on many of these, as it were. If it gets assigned to you, and I tell you, or John tells you, or Henry tells you, proceed, the funding is coming, don't let the absence stop you. That's different than it was years ago from what I heard. Years ago from what I heard, more times than not, there's not money there, we're not going to proceed. However, now that we are institutional planning and operations and have a broader area of expertise and a broader scope of responsibilities, we are going to proceed on some things that are important to the university without delay, and we'll figure out the funding later. Again, Henry or John, or I tell you to go ahead and proceed, you're good. Proceed. And then there's the funded project needing board approval. Back to my statement, there is no black and white. This is any number of scenarios. There's everything here from partly funded, waiting on that last $2 million in donor funds, as Joan has been working on for years, right? So there are projects like capital projects that will be supported with bond sales downstream, right? Where the university may have to figure out how to front millions of dollars, knowing that it'll be recovered when bonds are sold. Many of our larger capital projects have incredibly complex funding strategies behind them. And my message again to you is that's really up to John, Henry, and Tony and I to worry about. We'll coordinate with Mike Gower, the university CFO. We will coordinate with the CFOs of the 4 units, RBHS, Camden, Newark, and New Brunswick. We will figure out the timing of F&F. We will figure out timing of cash flow. And it gets choreographed. So the more projects that I see come in, the more complicated these get. But I'm asking you to don't worry about it. We'll figure out the timing. Sometimes it's not an easy choreograph, right? Sometimes there are other issues at the board that perhaps we don't want to take capital projects to that same meeting. For example, there's once a year there's a tuition and fees presentation of F&F and the board, and we typically avoid that for capital projects because their focus is on fees and tuition. All these things we coordinate. So there are about 4 other meetings throughout the course of the year without the need to call special meetings, and we are figuring out what projects need to go on when as informational. What projects need to go on when for action, right? What we don't want to do is have this PRF turn into an F&F item, right? Finance and facilities, and we surprise the board, right? We have a good record of not doing that. So we're going to continue to do that. I tell you, I know that it seems chaotic at times. I know it. It might look like chaos, but it's not. It might be chaotic, but it's choreographed. So the good news here, I think, for everybody who's watching on TV and everybody who's here, is this is not yours to worry about. This is yours for awareness. This is yours so you can understand better the processes here at ip&o, but Don't worry about it. I don't want people to leave here with their stress level increased thinking that this is more stuff that you have to worry about, right? This is really John, Henry, Tony, and I figuring all this stuff out. Any questions so far? Okay. So, given the absence of questions, that's pretty much what I have. So we've talked about PRF to renovation to board. This isn't a discussion about project management. Everybody here does what they do and does it well, right? So I'm not here to talk about how to manage projects. Manage projects to Joan is much different than managing a project to Marie, right? Two wildly different types of projects, both important to institutional planning operations. Public safety is not here today, but there's projects, for example, of Rutgers security cameras on PSE&G poles throughout the city of New Brunswick in select areas that benefit us, right? So there's some land use or utility use deals on that. There's getting approval from PSE&G to put stuff on their poles. You think public safety, they'd be interested in helping out. It doesn't speed up the monster that is the utility. There was a beginning point, targeted endpoint, and boy did it take resources. It's a project, right? The campus IDs, right? So a year ago, who knew how IDs worked around the institution, right? Actually kicked off as part of the one-stop, right? The student services one-stop. How can we provide services better to improve the student experience? Well, let's corral the ID card process. And if we're going to corral the ID card process for students, why don't we corral it for the entire institution? Right? Faculty, staff, visitors, foundation, students. So we attacked it as a project, right? Had a beginning point, had a targeted end point, had a schedule, and it took resources. And Pete Bennett and team took it on as a carefully organized project, and we were successful. So at the new student orientation last summer, almost a year ago now, 88%, I think was the number, 88% of the attendees walked away, the new student, walked away from the orientation with their ID card. That was up from 0%. So imagine going to new student orientation, historically at Rutgers, and you get your picture taken and say, 2 to 3 weeks, we'll figure out how to get an ID to you. We've gone from 0 to 88% at that first session, and next year, it'll be 100% of those who bring the right forms of ID, right? If you don't bring the right forms of ID, can't much help you. But anyway, that was a project. So anybody here who works on renovations or new buildings might not recognize that this is a project of institutional planning and operations, but it is. So projects like that, like the campus maps, come in as a PRF, they get vetted, they get assigned, and then they get executed. So it's not black and white, right? I don't think it'll ever be black and white. The bigger we get, the busier we get, maybe a little more chaotic it gets, but we'll choreograph it. We are so big and busy that the process needs to be nimble. So it's June 19th, right? June 19th. July 19th, something else might change. And we will respond accordingly, right? So I think we are one of the most nimble institutions in the Big Ten. I have gone to meeting after meeting of Big Ten and Friends, Association of University Architects, Capital Project Big Ten meetings. We are the fastest by far. Other universities, my peers that I speak to, have to present designs to the B&G, Buildings and Ground Committee of the board for their input and influence, right? I mean, imagine we had to present to a B&G committee once every 5 months and you couldn't finish your schematics until they approved it. Or you had to come back in 3 months with revised exterior renderings. Some of our peer institutions are part of a statewide system, and it has to go to the statewide Board of Regents for approval. And they tell us, they have told without exaggeration, what we get done in 6 to 8 months takes them 2 to 3 years, without exaggeration. So we are nimble, right? I expect that will continue. Don't worry about F&F and the board, right? Management of F&F and the board, and Tony and I rehearsed this so much. I said, Tony, when I talk about F&F and the board, make sure you walk in the back door. So don't worry about F&F and the board, right? Like, Tony Henry, John, Ghislaine, we prep, Tony rehearses. It's not yours to worry about, right? The hardest part is figuring out what to do when, what the reception's going to be. None of that is yours to worry about, and that's the perfect segue. So that's the conclusion on the process I have. Ghislaine?
We do have a Facebook question.
Okay.
And it is, are PRFs similar to RFP?
Oh, really good question. Yes, in that they contain the same three letters. They're wildly different, but it's a really good question, right? So PRF is project request form. As I said before, it's what enables a project to be kicked off well. We get the right information. We have, based on the right information, we assign it to the right people, and then it can be done and done well. An RFP is a request for proposal. It often is an RFP for AE services, so lots of acronyms, right? Request for proposal for architectural engineering services. A request for proposal for architectural engineering services is administered in-house at Rutgers. We have the benefit of being able to administer that process separate from our procurement friends here on the first floor. However, as I said before, right, projects years ago were conventional renovations and new construction. Today, in the larger scope of ip&o, projects aren't just involving architects and engineers. So an RFP, if it's not for an AE, may have to go to procurement. So if we did an RFP for the campus ID, for the university ID cards, I talked about that before, that was a request for proposal that went through procurement. An RFP is often misused when it comes to a construction bid, right? RFP, the P in that is proposal. We don't receive proposals for construction, we receive bids. That's kind of a separate process, very related. But no, PRF and RFP are two different things. All right. Any other questions? Bill?
Limit, or is it always going to increase in size and because it's...
So we talk about... The answer to that question lies in student enrollment, right? We don't really talk square footage. It's, we program facilities follows the program, right? So my understanding, and I'm going to look at Tony to see if my understanding is dated because it's a fast-moving place, is generally New Brunswick is stable in terms of student population. There might be an increase in engineering, a focused increase here, but generally the New Brunswick population is stable. Newark is looking to increase slightly, a little bit, with a focus on alternate route of education. So the honors living learning community, right, is a significant departure from the traditional incoming student, and you can read about that on the Newark website. So they're looking to increase there. Camden is talking potential significant increase, right? We're helping them understand whether they have the facilities and infrastructure in place to do that. And RBHS, for the most part, is stable. Their medical schools and dental schools are at capacity by accreditation or close to it, so I don't think there's going to be a significant increase there. Specific to your question, as it speaks to facilities, as I think everybody here in the room may know, we're looking to make the place smaller, right? How can we do things better? So one of our projects, right, I talked before about a project, could be an aggregation of smaller projects. One of our projects is plant size reduction. How do we carefully consider appropriate reduction of plant size? So when a building gets flooded by a steam pipe burst, small building, is it worth renovating? Right? When some school moves out and leaves a building that it really, thank God they moved out, we are asking questions of should that be repopulated, and if not, let's take it down. So there's a pretty robust plant reduction list. So I think Bill, to answer your question, some student areas going up, the university plant size should be reducing because we're doing things better. Any other questions?
You mentioned PRFs were reviewed about a month, every month, once a month.
Oh, I'm sorry.
By the committee.
Right, that was the old days, right.
Right. What is the frequency now that they are reviewed?
So, I had that stat and I blew right across it, so I'm glad you brought that up. So on a slow day, 1 or 2 PRFs come in. On a busy week, 12 to 15 come in. On a kind of a spiked week, 20 come in, and they get reviewed daily. right, daily. So the review happens daily. They go, again, some of them get tabled because additional information is required. Some get spiked and within a day or so, the person knows to put in a work order. And usually within a week, they're assigned. When there's deadlines associated with the PRF, right, somebody has a grant application that's due in 2 weeks, it gets assigned immediately. So it will go into Ghislaine's group for assignment, but simultaneously, a project manager will be assigned, say, look, this thing's due in 2 weeks, let's get out there and start. So we've gone from, maybe 18 to 20 once a month being reviewed to 3 to 12 or 15 a week that just get processed.
Hi, Dave. I get frequently asked, and I always say that they can, but I want to make sure that I'm not putting out misinformation. But I get asked all the time, can anyone at the university submit a PRF?
Oh, good question. You need to log into the system to submit a PRF. So if you have, where's the tech guys? CAS, right? Central Authentication Service Access. If you,
Net ID, basically.
yeah, exactly. So you need a net ID. And since we implemented that, the spam has gone down. Ghislaine, we had weeks where we got 200 of these in spam, right? We now get 0 in spam. And I got to tell you, 99% of these, or 95% are legit good requests. The few that aren't are work orders, and we tell them. But yes, you do need to log into the system to put that in.
But there are no restrictions on where you fall in your department. As long as you have your net ID, anyone can submit one.
That's correct. Now, here's my advice, is people should understand that we do a sniff test with the dean or chancellor, right? So we have an excellent working relationship with all the deans and chancellors, right? So if I see something come in, and I won't mention the school, right? But if I see something come in from, well, actually I will, from Donna Piazza, right? I have high confidence that she's the right person in that school to be putting in these projects. If I see, Dr. Smith, who's a professor, requesting, renovate my lab, and I look at this thing and, boy, there's going to be a $10 million project, and the dean nor the chancellor's office is given a heads up on this, I flip it to the dean and chancellor and say, is this a legit request? And more times than not, the dean comes back and says, no, I'll talk to the person. So the system works pretty well, right? So despite how big we are, and despite the breadth of everything that ip&o covers, we have a good working relationship with those we need to work with, so these kind of wacky PRFs are few and far between. Anything else?
Any other questions?
All right, so we are 1 hour and 20 minutes earlier than what Liz told me I had to fill. So I want to close with thank you all for taking time out of your busy day, right? So I know how busy this place is. I said it a bunch of times during this. I know how chaotic it might seem. I know how busy all of you are. Thanks for taking this hour or almost an hour out of your time today, out of your day. Whoever's watching online, I appreciate it as well. Note that everything I said is subject to change, right? I had a significant description of change between 2012, 2013 processes and today. Embrace change because it's here to stay, right? It's a cliche. So as change happens, we'll roll with it and roll it out. What doesn't change is why are we here, right? We're here to serve the faculty, staff, students. We need to be nimble, so we will change our processes as need be to stay nimble and stay ahead of the curve. And my final note is thanks for everybody in the room and online for specifically what you do on execution of these projects, right? What I said is I'm going to talk about process, but once it gets in your hands, you do it and you do it well. And I thank you for that because I have the easy part, right? It gets assigned and done. The hard part is actually doing it, which is what all you do. So thank you much.